afternoon, good evening, greetings to whichever ghouls are lucky enough to be watching this video. My name is Eleanor Phoenix and I create beauty content while incorporating political and social commentary. Before we get into this video, I want to stress that I will be focusing on the experiences of women in developed Western countries, as it is obvious that women in developing and Eastern countries are still extremely oppressed, considering that they aren't allowed to drive, own their own bank accounts, aspire to a career, or even choose whether or not to wear hijab. However, the majority of these subjects that I will cover in this video can be applied to women worldwide. I also want to add a content warning that I will be talking about sexual assault and eating disorders. There are over 7.7 billion people on Earth today, and more than half of these people are women. However, when you look at heads of state, governments, corporations, and other global contenders, you are almost always looking at men, and more often than not, those men are white. Why is the world and its resources still run by men? Why are meaningful jobs and careers like firefighting and engineering still comprised mostly of men? Why are women still not equally enjoying the fruits of our labours, intellectual abilities and dreams? Many people in developed Western countries would argue that women are no longer an oppressed minority group, and in this video we're going to be exploring whether or not this is true. Has feminism completed its goal, and are women finally equal to men, socially, economically and politically? To answer this question, I will be dividing this video into sections to discover whether women have achieved equality across all societal elements. I want to preface this video by disclosing that I am a feminist, but during my research I tried to keep an open mind and I attempted to work through an objective lens. I also did not delve very deeply into the unique struggles that women of colour experience. I wanted all of my findings to be applicable to all women regardless of race or skin colour. Only then can we say for certain that women as a whole are or aren't oppressed. Section 1. History. Throughout the majority of recorded human history, women's contributions to society has often been undervalued, underpaid, and unappreciated. Motherhood, pregnancy, and childbirth was once praised during prehistoric times, and women were once worshipped for our ability to bring new life into the world. But somewhere along the way, this attitude changed, and instead the only expectation of and value placed on women by society was that of creating and raising offspring. Motherhood was no longer valued and celebrated, but instead demanded of women, and any who dared to question this mindset or rebel against these societal gender roles would either be ostracized, sabotaged, or eradicated. Despite the obstacles that they experienced in their lives, we still have many women to thank for the advanced world that we live in today. Many of these women often go unnamed, and once again their contributions to society are undervalued, underpaid and unappreciated. We learned that James D. Watson and Francis H.C. Crick uncovered the DNA double helix formation when it was actually Rosalind Franklin. Otto Hahn is said to be the man who outlined the concept of nuclear fission, but he chose to omit his partner Lisa Meitner's name from the landmark paper that revealed the discovery. Hedy Lamarr collaborated with George Field to create a radio guidance system for Allied torpedoes, and their work would turn out to be nothing less than the basis of the omnipresent Wi-Fi, CDMA and Bluetooth wireless technologies. But the Navy never gave them their due credit. Even Einstein, who's revered by many as being the most intelligent man and most influential physicist of all time, allegedly never made any discoveries without his first wife. Once he remarried his cousin, he didn't really make many more landmark contributions to physics. Other examples of women who we don't talk about because men try and usually succeed in taking credit for our inventions and successes include Margaret Knight, Elizabeth McGee, Ada Lovelace, Margaret Keane, Drogila of Salerno, Candace Pert, Chien-Shing Wu, Mary Golda Ross, and Alice Augusta Ball. The plagiarisms that women have endured throughout history is still not being acknowledged, and men are still receiving credit for work that is not their own. And this is true in every realm, from science to art to music. Thus, we can safely say that within the subject of history, we are still discriminated against, and until women's contributions are acknowledged and celebrated to the same degree that men's are, we won't be able to say that we are treated as equals. Section 2. Healthcare. The most shocking information that I learned when researching for this video was the inequalities that women experience within healthcare. Male and female bodies function in different ways, and we often require different things to stay healthy. Our symptoms are also different when we experience heart attacks, strokes, autism, ADHD, and other disabilities or health issues. Despite this, the only symptoms that many professionals and first aid students know about are male symptoms, and there are no laws in place in any country that require sex disaggregated data within research. As expected, this has massively detrimental effects. Because of an absence of sex disaggregated human and animal clinical trials, we are missing a massive chunk of data that is applicable to over half of the population on this planet. Many prescribed drugs that are supposed to help people with depression, Alzheimer's, ADHD, and other health problems are not as helpful for women as they are for men. It has also led to women being 47% more likely to be seriously injured in car accidents. 60% of women who have strokes will die from it compared to only 40% of men. Women face a 20% increased risk of developing heart failure or dying within 5 years after their first severe heart attack compared with men. We are also less likely to be diagnosed when we have autism, ADHD, Asperger's, and other mental disabilities. Due to a lack of sex disaggregated data within diet research, women are also more likely to suffer from obesity, and as a result, heat stroke, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, etc. At the same time, we are more likely to suffer from eating disorders such as anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. Women are also more likely to be diagnosed with mood disorders such as depression, borderline personality disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and anxiety. This is not because women are more biologically predisposed to these disorders than men. In fact, it is likely due to 3 factors. The first being that women are stereotypically seen as the emotional sex. Thus, we are more likely to be diagnosed with disorders even if we do not suffer from them. The second factor is that when women complain about physical symptoms, it isn't rare for us to be told that it's all in our heads. This is a factor as to why PCOS and endometriosis often goes undiagnosed in women for years. The third factor to us being diagnosed with emotional disorders more often could be that women are more likely to suffer from these emotional disorders because of the discrimination that women experience on a day-to-day basis under the patriarchy. Nurture wins over nature in this case. With this information, it's pretty obvious that women are still subject to sexism within the healthcare system. The patriarchy. A lot of the time when feminists talk about the patriarchy, the definition gets lost. What we are talking about when we mention the patriarchy isn't the dictionary definition. When we say the patriarchy, we don't mean a system of society or government in which the father or the eldest male is head of the family and descent is reckoned through the male line. What we actually mean is a system or systems producing and reproducing gendered and intersectional inequalities and men's power and women's subordination. It is a system of social, political, and economic structures and practices in which men as a group/category govern, oppress, and exploit women as a group/category. I'm using men as a group and women as a group here to underline not all men and not all women. In terms of government, there are laws pertaining to the bodily autonomy of women. In terms of oppression, women often live in the shadow of male violence. And in terms of exploitation, women still take on disproportionate levels of unpaid caregiving and household tasks. What feminists also mean when we talk about the patriarchy is a political social system that insists that males are inherently dominating, superior to everything and everyone deemed weak, especially females, and endowed with the right to dominate and rule over the weak and to maintain that dominance through various forms of psychological terrorism and violence. The psychological burden experienced by women is a huge part of the patriarchy. The fact that we are raised to both attract men and protect ourselves from them. Wear something revealing to attract him, but don't show too much because then you're a whore and it's your fault if you get raped. Keep your keys between your knuckles when you're walking home at night. Everything we do or feel is sexualized. Shyness is sexualized, anger is sexualized, our ignorance or lack of intelligence is sexualized, intelligence is sexualized. But if you're a sexual woman, then you're demonized. The fact that almost every woman has her own story of harassment, sexual assault, or rape. The fact that we're still debating whether or not this sexual violence is systemic in its roots. That's what I mean when I say the patriarchy. It's also important to mention that not all patriarchies are created equal. A lot of people have been pointing to what is going on in Iran and Afghanistan to say that women are not structurally oppressed in the West. But this is the equivalent of saying that the USA in the 1980s wasn't institutionally racist because it wasn't apartheid South Africa. We can acknowledge our relative freedoms in the West and use them to speak on others' behalves without denying the inequalities that we still face. So, on a societal level, we can say that the patriarchy is putting women at a disadvantage. Home life. Across all regions of the world, women spend on average between 3 and 6 hours on unpaid labour, such as looking after children and the elderly, while men spend between half an hour and 2 hours. Women spend an average over 100 hours more per year on household chores than men. This means that men have more time to dedicate towards careers and hobbies, which is a major contributing factor to the wage gap. Women are also often expected to carry the mental load. The mental load is the cognitive effort involved in managing work, relationships, a family, and a household. It is comprised of the details an individual manages throughout the day. It has to do with one's responsibilities, formal or not, as well as the decisions one has to make. Walk the dog, clean the cat box, call the plumber, check your emails, fold the laundry, make dinner, check in on your mother-in-law, remember your uncle's birthday, take your daughter to ballet class, make a shopping list and then go grocery shopping. The list goes on. In most heterosexual households, the person who carries the majority of the mental load is the woman. Constantly trying to keep track of what needs to be done can become mentally and emotionally exhausting. When we're talking about the mental load, we are focusing on cognitive agility in labour rather than the physical labour involved. Of course, this doesn't imply that the person experiencing that effort doesn't also do the physical work. What makes the mental load especially difficult to deal with is that it is often invisible. The stress you manage, the chaos you endure, the juggling, code switching and mental weight of it often goes unnoticed by others. The consequences to taking sole responsibility for the mental load include emotional exhaustion, burnout, anxiety and depression, sleep deprivation, neglecting healthy eating and exercise, and losing interest in sex. No wonder the divorce rate today is so high. Considering all of these issues, it's safe to say that within the context of home life, women are still getting the short end of the stick. Politics. Sexism in political elections ranges in influences on the supply, demand, and selection of candidates to electoral results. Such prejudice can take varying forms, such as benevolent or hostile sexism, often stemming from fears of women threatening the power or leadership of men. It doesn't take a lot of investigation to see that sexism still affects our politics today. Research spanning the past several decades indicates that female politicians continue to be at a disadvantage in the way that they are covered by the media, and that women are often dissuaded from entering the political realm because of gendered media reporting. The majority of elected officials within politics are straight, white, cisgendered men. One female politician noted that when a woman is in a leadership position, we expect her to be tough. However, if she's too tough, she seems witchy. But she can't be too soft because then she gets labelled as not tough enough for the job. Let's have a look at the 2016 presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. A side note that I'm not a fan of Hillary, but I will say that she was still a better option for president than a businessman, ex-reality TV star, and sexual predator. Clinton had some skeletons in her closet. Just about every politician out there does. But the question in elections is compared to what? If we take the criticisms of Clinton and apply them to the opposing party, Trump did not run a smoother campaign than Clinton. His team featured more infighting, leaking and disturbances. He made more obvious mistakes in a week than she made in a year. His finances were shadier than Clinton's, his foundations less ethical, his behaviour more erratic. He walked into the debates unprepared, ran a ludicrous and ineffective convocation, and he won the election nonetheless. The hard truth that needs to be swallowed is if Trump was a woman, he would not have won the election. And if Clinton was a man, she most likely would have won against Trump. Many of Clinton's strengths were also hidden by our gendered expectations of leaders. What she was good at would have been important for her presidency, but it is not what 44 male presidents in a row have taught Americans to expect. Anyone who thinks sexism isn't a force in American politics should have a damn good answer to the question of why. In a country where over half the population are women, there has never been a female president, and aside from Clinton, no woman has ever come close to winning a major party's nomination. And let's not forget that after Hillary lost, she wrote her third memoir, filmed a documentary, co-founded a production company, and launched a podcast. She didn't spend the next 2 years throwing a tantrum on Twitter and demanding a repeat of the election. Anyone claiming that women are too emotional to lead need to have a good look at a history book, because women aren't the ones who have caused the majority of drama throughout human history. Not to mention that female brains have more grey matter, which enables individuals to control emotions. So on average, females outperform males in emotional regulation. Thus, science also disagrees with the notion that women are too emotional to lead. The USA is not the only country in the West where sexism is an overwhelming problem within politics. Far-left National Assembly Deputy Mathilde Panot was called Fish Lady and crazy by her male colleagues in the latest episode of a long series of sexist attacks against female politicians in France. Australian women with the temerity to join a political party and get elected into the ranks of its leaders are catcalled, denigrated and degraded right in the heart of Parliament. When the Green Party in Germany chose Annalena Baerbock as its front runner in April, it did so with confidence that after 16 years of Angela Merkel, voters had shed their apprehensions of aspiring female politicians. But soon after the announcement of her candidacy, voices online emerged, questioning whether a mother of two would be suitable for the chancellorship. Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, was slapped down in 2018 for referring to his shadow counterpart Emily Thornberry by her husband's title rather than by her name. Answering Thornberry, whose High Court judge husband is a knight, Johnson referred to her as Baroness, whatever it is, I cannot remember what it is, Nagy. Taking all of these instances into consideration, along with the infinitely long list of other examples where female politicians have been subjected to sexism in modern day, it is safe to say that we have not reached equality within the scope of politics. The wage gap. The wage gap remains a subject of debate despite the vast amount of evidence gathered to prove its existence. Women are making less than men per hour. But the question is why? The gender pay gap is the result of many factors, and different groups of women experience very different gaps in pay. Over the past decade, women have been making serious inroads into high-paying professions traditionally dominated by men. As of 2016, more female students have been enrolled in law schools than male, likewise for medical schools. With so many women entering lucrative fields, you might assume that the gender wage gap would be shrinking. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Not only is it stagnant, but in fact, women in some of the highest paying professions are losing out the most relative to men. Female physicians and surgeons are compensated only 71 cents to every dollar paid to their male counterparts, which translates to a 29% gap. And 9 cents behind the 80 cents on the dollar women are paid overall. The difference is even more pronounced for financial managers, where there is a 35% gap. And in the legal field, the average salary for men is over 140k, a full 24% more than the 106k that women earn. There are several reasons why this gap persists. The first is one I mentioned earlier. Women do more unpaid work like household chores and care of children and the elderly than men do, and this often isn't by choice. This ultimately means that women don't have the time to dedicate to their careers as men do, because men will often take up less responsibility as husbands than when they are single, whereas women will take up more responsibility as wives than when they are single. Women are also usually the primary caregiver in heterosexual relationships with children. Another reason is that women tend to work in lower paid sectors and roles. We know that many of the more poorly paid occupations are those traditionally done by women, requiring skills traditionally regarded as feminine, such as people skills and caring skills. So women choose to work as nurses, teachers, or shop assistants, while men choose to be surgeons, construction workers, or engineers. The issue here is that we undervalue traditionally female skills. So in reality, women aren't choosing lower paid work. We're choosing careers that require our skills, and because of the fact that these skills are seen as feminine, the jobs are paying less. Nursing and teaching used to be pretty high-paying and prestigious jobs when men were dominating those fields, but now that women have started to dominate these careers, they are being paid and valued less. The opposite is true for a certain field within technology. Coding and computer programming used to be a woman's job. In the beginning, there was a general sense that the computer itself was doing the work and building the computer was the really important thing. It took a few decades to get to the point now where we just take for granted that software is also important. After World War II, although women who performed other wartime jobs had always been expected to give the jobs up to men when they returned from war, this wasn't the case with programming. After all, men had never done it before. And after the war, there was such a boom in computing that there were more jobs than qualified people to fill them. And so that was a reason why women weren't pushed out, but pulled in. Programming was often conflated with low-level clerical work, commonly performed by women, like typing or filing, and these stereotypes about the job helped keep its pay and prestige low. Programmer Grace Hopper, who invented the first computer language compiler, also used gender stereotypes to encourage women to enter the field. In a 1967 Cosmopolitan article titled "The Computer Girls," she quipped that programming is just like planning a dinner. Programming requires patience and the ability to handle detail. Women are naturals at computer programming. People like Grace Hopper were very consciously mobilizing gender stereotypes to get women in. Programming, some argued, was similar to knitting, sewing, or even crossword puzzles, so women were a perfect fit. Over time, stereotypes about the field shifted to the point that computer programming came to be seen as a job better suited for men than women. Instead of a job that was perfect for detail-oriented women who loved to collaborate and plan, it became a job for antisocial, geeky boys. In the summer of 2017, a white male programmer at Google was fired for writing widely circulated memo that used gender stereotypes to argue that women were inherently worse at programming than men. The irony. There are multiple likely factors that contributed to programming's shift from a woman-friendly occupation to one that is hostile to women. In the 1950s and 60s, employers began relying on aptitude tests and personality profiles that weeded out women by prioritizing stereotypically masculine traits and increasingly antisocialness. The introduction of the home computer as a boy's toy in the 1980s was also a factor that pushed more men than women into computer science. Radio Shack ran ads showing that personal computers were great for nerdy boys and sporty boys because they could use it to do homework and play video games. When professions shift from male-dominated to female-dominated, they usually see decreases in pay and prestige. The opposite is true for professions that shift from female-dominated to male-dominated. This is a massive contributing factor to the wage gap. Another reason why the wage gap exists is men having more senior roles. It is certainly true that there are more senior men than women in the workplace as a whole, and as senior people tend to be paid more than junior people, this has a negative effect on the gender pay gap. However, that doesn't mean that the disparity cannot be tackled. At the heart of its problem is an assumption that senior jobs naturally require long hours and constant availability, and so cannot be done flexibly or part-time. This is largely due to the 1950s pattern of men going out to work and women being at home to support them. enabling men to focus on work to the exclusion of everything else in life. And it has been exacerbated in many sectors by globalization and always-on technology, which have extended the working day to 10 or 12 hours. Indeed, employers operating a long hours culture for senior roles are likely to be the worst offenders. Long hours have been shown to be inherently gendered and to exacerbate the gender pay gap. And research has shown that for the highest educated women, the gender pay gap has not fallen at all in the last 25 years. In conclusion, the wage gap does exist, and it is a complicated issue that requires more than just one solution. My lens keeps on coming out. White women. Pick-me girls, anti-feminist women, female hemorrhoids, and women with an aversion to feminism are often white. The reason being is that there is a certain level of privilege that white women experience, and this makes it easier for them to be manipulated into believing that women are not oppressed and sexism is a thing of the past. Women, especially white women, have been brainwashed by the patriarchy to believe that we aren't oppressed, that we are safe from oppression, and that sexism is no longer an issue in the 21st century. A massive problem concerning Roe v. Wade is that the criminalisation of abortion is affecting lower paid classes more, which translates into women of colour being more affected by this issue. A rich woman seeking an abortion has the money to travel to a different state to get the procedure, but when you're struggling to put food on the table, you're not going to have the time or money to travel to get an abortion. The majority of people who seek abortions are women who already have children, and they have to choose between bringing another child into the world or being able to provide for the family that they already have. A lot of the time it comes down to, can I afford this child, or are my kids and I going to end up on the street if I go through with this? In total, the average cost of pregnancy and childbirth in the USA for someone with private insurance still costs over $18,000. If you were put in a position where you either had to get an abortion or bring a new child into the world only for you and your family to end up homeless, what would you choose? Personally, I would choose my family every time. White women are also often further oppressing our fellow women of colour, sometimes without us realising it. The notion of privilege is complex, especially when we experience both privilege and oppression, which positions us to act in conflicting manners. This phenomenon is noticeable when women of colour and white women speak to each other about racism and race. While white women are members of an oppressed group based on gender, we still experience privilege based on race. This dual oppressor/oppressed identity often becomes a root of tension when white women are challenged to consider our white privilege. All of our social identities inform and shape one another. A person's identity as a woman is shaped by multiple factors in her life, including race, social class, sexual orientation, and so on. While sexism shapes the nature of womanhood, white womanhood looks very different to Asian, Black, Indigenous, or Latina womanhood, because each woman's experience is shaped by the internal expectations and external perceptions of what it means to be a woman within each of these racial communities. Health at every size. Another issue that has come to fruition because of the joint oppressor/oppressed identity of white womanhood is the health at every size movement. I am of the opinion that HAES and fat liberation is a racist movement because it gives Black and brown women a false sense of security on a subject that is detrimental to their health and ostracizes them if they decide to lose weight. As soon as a fat celebrity or influencer decides to lose weight, the whole of the HAES movement jumps onto social media to express their disappointment. The movement also uses Black women as a scapegoat to further their agenda by spewing lies like anti-fatness is rooted in anti-blackness. The HAES movement was actually started by white women such as Linda Bacon and Barbara Altman Bruno. And before I get people jumping on my back telling me that I shouldn't call Linda a woman because they're non-binary, my point still stands. They are a white female. The reason why people aren't attracted to and dislike fatness isn't because of the fact that it's somehow connected to race. It's because being morbidly obese is unhealthy. No amount of biased and unscientific research is going to change that fact. HAES completely disregards the varying forms of institutionalized racism and tries to get women, especially Black and brown women, to believe that they are just naturally bigger. Black and brown people aren't naturally bigger than white people. The reason why obesity is a bigger problem within the black community than the white community in the USA and the UK is a product of institutionalized racism such as redlining, food deserts, corporate glass ceilings, urban planning and marketing. HAES and fat liberation tend to pull in minority groups with virtue signaling while at the same time disregarding their struggles by trying to claim that fat people are systemically oppressed in the same way that black or brown people are. Fat activists frequently mention minorities as a shield to prevent being held accountable for spreading lies. It's manipulative and insincere. There's also this half-truth that fat activists spread, where they claim that doctors refuse to diagnose them because they are fat. This is true, but it isn't because doctors don't like fat people. It's because it is that hard to diagnose and 1,000 times more difficult to operate on someone who is obese. Receiving the wrong diagnoses is even more detrimental than getting none at all. Extra weight gives doctors a whole other set of issues to identify and a much higher risk of complications. Another reason why fat women are not receiving diagnoses is because they are women, not because they are fat. As I mentioned earlier, this is because of sexism within the healthcare system. Fat women also do not fit into conventional Western beauty standards, so they can be treated very poorly by society. But this is not equivalent to systemic racism or sexism, and it is important to acknowledge that. With this movement in mind, it is obvious that women can also actively and passively oppress other women. Afterthoughts. On average, phones, musical instruments, computer keyboards and work tools are too big for an average woman's hand, which means that we're more likely to suffer from injuries while we use them. Careers that have become female-dominated, because let's not forget that most careers were male-dominated at some point in time, are slowly getting paid less. In 2019, the gender pay gap across all occupations was 80%, and this is mainly because women still do 75% of the world's unpaid care work, such as caring for children and the elderly. We also spend, on average, 3 times the amount of time on cooking and cleaning than men do. In car accidents, we are 47% more likely to be seriously injured, 71% more likely to be moderately injured, and 17% more likely to die, because car safety features are only ever tested on male crash test dummies. And while heart attacks are not necessarily more prominent in women than men, they are often more fatal because our symptoms are different and less likely to be recognised. In first aid courses, you only learn how to tell when a man is having a heart attack or a stroke, which means it isn't noticed when a woman is having one. Women are dying because of the inequality that is still so very prominent in today's society. AIs are being designed to recognise male voices more efficiently and thus be more helpful towards men because of the lack of sex disaggregated data within research. And even when the data is there, it isn't used. And while we're at it, let's mention the fact that men and women's public toilets also have the same amount of cubicles. But men also have urinals, which means that even our toilets are made in men's favour. The inequalities that women face are at best an inconvenience, and at worst, they can kill us. It isn't taught as general knowledge that women and females of different species aren't included and haven't been included in the vast majority of clinical trials, studies and experiments throughout human history. And this has severe consequences. It has created a massive gap in just about every sector of life between men and women, from healthcare to household chores to the wage gap. Women are often not even aware of how oppressed we still are. Sexism is inherently a part of culture, as culture instills a certain set of beliefs or expectations for what constitutes appropriate behaviour, appearance, or mannerisms based on a person's sex. There is still rampant sexism in nearly every area of life. Even though legally we may have achieved equality in some countries, we still have a long fight ahead of us when it comes to political, social, and economic equality and equity between the sexes. Nevertheless, with all of the information that I've provided in this video, along with any information and experiences that you have, you need to come to your own conclusions as to whether or not you think that women are oppressed. That's all I have for this video today. I want to thank you all very much for watching. I know that this has been a long video, which isn't what I normally do, but let me know if you like more longer videos like this one, or if you prefer I stick to my short and fairly brief videos. If you want to see more of me, then subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on Instagram and on TikTok if you'd like. It's at EleanorIPhoenix on all platforms. I also have a Twitter account that I never use, but you're more than welcome to follow me on there too. I hope to see you all in my next video. Peace, love, and respect. Excuse me.